IB Nation, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It's Wednesday, so that means it is time for our midweek rundown. Have some interesting topics that I wanted to talk about today, and I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are on these topics. And so what I'm going to do on these next few Wednesday shows, actually really most of the Wednesday shows, barring just breaking news coming up, is I'm going to start kind of taking a little bit of a deeper dive into the team. And, we're doing the position previews and we'll break down each position from that standpoint. But what I'm talking about right now is more looking at it from the standpoint of what are some of the deeper topics to discuss, and so that some of it will be, not I won't say deeper, but just more refined. So instead of zeroing in on a position, last week we did sophomores that we expect to break out this season. And this week we'll talk about sort of a now or never moment for certain players. And there's veteran players that kind of enter, hey, if it doesn't happen for you now, it may never happen for you for a host of reasons. We're going to talk about potential breakout players, all-American candidates, all types of fun stuff as we really dive into preparing for this 2023 season for Notre Dame, which I really believe is an important season for Notre Dame. I really do. It's not a make or break season for Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame, but it's a season to where success could vault you into another stratosphere, and a repeat of last year or anything like it could result in Notre Dame looking, where they've lost a lot of the momentum that they had. And now questions start to arise about certain things around the program. Can you thrive in the NIL era? If that's the reason or not, that'll be, the reason. Is Marcus Freeman that guy? So we're entering a really important period. And so we're going to dive into that and just a lot of those different topics, and we'll break it down each week. And that's what a lot of the stuff is going to be. I'm also going to dive into a lot of different recruiting topics. Today, for example, is kind of goes along with what I was just saying about the 2023 season, and that is that Notre Dame enters a bit of a crossroads right now with recruiting, and it's in a lot of different ways. It's short term, filling out the 24 class and how the success they have in June, which we've talked about. It's over the course of the next year, evaluating certain coaches and can they do the job, looking at the 2025 class and how important that class is going to be to Notre Dame's future. And just how this next year period is going to be incredibly important and can be sort of that defining class for Notre Dame. And I'll get into some of the reasons why I believe that to be the case as we get into the show. Then let's dive into, at the end, we're going to talk about Sam Hartman and the Heisman. It's been kind of a hot topic around on the message board, and just some different things that have come up. And is he getting the respect? And people ask, what does he need to do to win the Heisman? So we'll have a little bit of a brief segment along those lines as well, and dive into to that as we let's continue to explore topics. Just a reminder that on these Wednesday shows, we are not going to be doing mailbags. I will answer any questions that you might have. If you need to put a super chat in there, I just want to explain too why that is, because I've had some people ask. It's not number one, it's just kind of me doing these solo shows, right? Obviously. And it is very hard to it's a challenge to stay on point, stay on topic, stay in my stream of thought, which sometimes you guys know for me is hard enough even when I am locked in, because I can kind of go on these long tangents on things. But staying on point, staying on topic of that, monitoring the message board, making sure that everybody's, doing what they need to do, and then going through and finding questions. And then you get into the mailbag portion and I got to pull them up. And it to me creates for an awkward show. And so I've decided not to do those when I'm doing the Wednesday solo shows. And we have, especially this time of year, we have the mailbag on Friday. We have mailbags after every show. I feel like we have plenty of chances to get questions answered. I know they'll be doing a mailbag tonight on IB Nation Sports Talk. So that's the reason why. So if you have questions on this Wednesday show, please just throw them out there to me. I'll get to those at the end of the show. So let's dive into the first topic. And this is every year sort of it's a really intriguing conversation. And you look over the years and we've seen, veteran players that maybe don't do a whole lot, that go into their senior seasons and have breakout seasons. If you just go back and look at the Brian Kelly era. He had guys like Jonas Gray, who was considered a disappointment, a bust his first 3 years. He was a top 100 running back, hadn't really done a whole lot at Notre Dame. Comes out his senior year, and he was awesome his senior year up until the injury against Boston College. He sort of had that. He was in a now or never moment. This is your last chance to go prove yourself and be able to finish your career off on a good note. Or for some players who maybe aren't seniors, hey, look, you're in a position now where you're being given this opportunity to be the guy or a guy. And you've got some young players breathing down your neck. And if you don't step up this offseason or this season and kind of the offseason leading into the fall, then your window may close. And the better you recruit, which is what we've seen at certain positions, the better it's going to be. Asmar Bilal, somebody just mentioned in the chat, is another guy that went from just a big disappointment. I'll say disappointment, just a guy that didn't do a whole lot during his career. We thought he was going to be better than he was, never really fulfilled that potential. We've kind of had these moments. I think Dalen Hayes is another guy that was a good rotation guy, but really his last year had a chance to make an impact and did. And we've seen other guys that had that chance and didn't make that impact. Javon McKinley is one who was a guy that was considered a disappointment most of his career, never did a whole lot. Goes into that last year, hey, this is your last chance to make an impact. And I thought he did. He was their best receiver on a team that went to the college football playoff. So we've seen guys like this over time that have really been key to what they do. And if they don't step up, then you see them get passed up pretty quickly. So I want to begin on offense. And I have three guys in mind on offense that you look at and say, these guys enter sort of make or break seasons for different reasons. And the first two are going to be skill players. And then you're going to have an offensive lineman. And the first guy I want to talk about is Chris Tyree. The reason I put Chris Tyree in this category is he has 2 seasons of eligibility remaining, and I hope that he uses them now that he's a receiver. Before, I thought this is just going to be Chris Tyree's last year. He's going to be a running back. There's no way you bring him back for a 5th year. What's the point? He kind of is what he is as a running back. But now that he's shifted to receiver, I do believe there's merit, if he's willing to do so, to bringing him back for a 5th season. But he enters a situation where you've got some talent behind you in Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores and Caleb Smith. And then you've got some kids signed in the 2024 class. Micah Gilbert's a guy that I think could be a slot player and a really talented player. You've got Aeneas Williams coming into the 24 class as a running back that can do a lot of the things that Chris Tyree can do. And so Chris Tyree enters this period where I don't think he necessarily has to have this giant breakout where he catches 40 passes for 800 yards or anything like that. It'd be nice, right? It would certainly have a big impact. But I think it's an opportunity for Chris Tyree to come out and say, hey, look, I am finally being given a chance to do something. And I would argue that Chris Tyree hasn't really been given an opportunity the last couple of years to be that guy. You had in 2021, he battled injuries, but also Brian Kelly just came out and said he's a guy that we just used to give Kyron Williams a breather. I think that was a missed opportunity. When in the few times he was given opportunities, you saw him make some big plays. In 2022, they went to an offense that didn't really fit Chris's style. They continue to try to use him in those ways. I thought early on, Chris had an impact. You go back and look at the Cal game, the North Carolina game. Chris Tyree had 2 games in the first 4 weeks of the season where he had over 100 yards of total offense. And I think that sort of set the tone for how teams defended him the rest of the year, although the Notre Dame staff never really used him consistently the way they needed to. Then you fast forward to the Clemson game. They throw him 2 quick screens and he gets 26 yards, bam, easy. And he just could steal yards like that and just never really got that opportunity to go into a season where it's like, okay, hey, you're a guy that we are building around. You're a guy that we're anticipating being an impact player for Notre Dame this season. And he's going to get that opportunity this year. Now, how exactly that's going to look, we're going to find out. And it's going to somewhat tie into the next guy. But, you obviously have Jaden Thomas that plays a lot of slot. He was a starter late in the year at slot last year. I thought did some great work in the slot. I could easily see him being there again this year. But I also think Jaden could play a lot outside. I think early on, you'll see Chris Tyree, if Jaden stays in the slot, I think you'll see Chris Tyree be a bit of a gadget player early on, where he'll have a chance to kind of come in and do some of the things that we saw last year, jet sweeps, get some screens, get some perimeter stuff. As he evolves and develops as a receiver, and then eventually, hopefully by the end of the year, you can use him more on more things down the field. That could be the path that he goes to. Or if Chris has a really strong offseason, really enhances his ability to be a quality route runner, and continues to improve his ball skills. Not that he can't catch, but it's just catching the ball down the field 20, 30, 40 yards over the seam, things along those lines, is a whole different animal than what he's done in the past, where he's caught wheel routes and slides and look screens. And I think Chris has good ball skills. If you go back and watch him in high school, I think it was his junior year, they would put him outside and let him go run go routes, and he'd go make plays. You saw in the highlights we showed last week where he caught a pass down the field and outplayed JD Bertrand for the football. So the talent is there. It's just more about a consistency that comes with just experience doing it. So how quickly can he really get comfortable there to where the quarterback say, hey, look, when Chris is running up that seam and he's got a window over the linebackers in front of the safeties, I can put that sucker out there because he's going to be able to go get it and make those plays and not have it bounce off his hands and get picked off by the safety. So that's a big period for Chris, showing that he can do more than just be a screen gimmicky guy. And then does that force Notre Dame to say, hey, look, we've got to get him on the field more. So we're going to have to do some different things. Maybe you do some more 21 personnel type looks where Chris is in the backfield. You move him around. Maybe it's a couple times you get him on jet sweeps. You have Aldrich kind of as the lead blocker, as we saw. If you guys remember back in the 2014 Music City Bowl, that was the play that CJ Prosise had the 50-yard touchdown on against LSU. He was still a receiver then. He comes in motion. You hand him off a jet sweep, and then Torian Folson is the lead blocker. He has a great cut on the edge, and that's something that helps spring CJ Prosise for that long run. So Chris Tyree's a unique player because he brings a really dynamic element to the table that we just have seen in spurts and we haven't seen consistently, because I don't believe that the staff has done enough to put him in a lot of those situations where his dynamic speed, where his one cut ability can make an impact. I believe that Jared Parker is going to do that. Now it's up to Chris to take advantage. If he doesn't really step up and he's just sort of a gimmicky gadget player all year, I don't know if there's as much merit in bringing him back next year. You're going to have the 4 freshmen a year older. Jaden's going to still be on the roster. Deion Colsey's going to be on the roster. You have 3 new freshmen coming in, plus Aeneas Williams. It's one of those things where if he doesn't come out and perform well, you're just going to have to say, hey, it's time to move on. But if he does perform well, not only for him do you look forward to say, Chris, we think coming back next year could really do you some good, could really help you in the NFL, just really prove that you can be this kind of all-around player. But more importantly, it'll really help this 23 football team a ton. So I think this is a now or never period for Chris Tyree. I'm optimistic that he's actually going to have an impact season. I don't know what the volume will be like. That remains to be seen. There's a lot of questions we have about how exactly the offense is going to look. But I think it's a situation where whatever he does, whether it's 25 touches, 35 touches, 50 touches, 60 touches, between catches and handoffs and jet sweeps, that I don't know. But if they use him correctly, I think his yards per touch is going to be something that this offense greatly needs. And Chris could have a big impact on this football team. Now, what kind of ties into this is another player, and that's Deion Colsey. Now, he's a junior, right? So Deion still has eligibility remaining past the season, senior year and all that. But I think Deion enters in a very important period for himself. What I don't mean here is I don't say, well, if Deion Colsey doesn't become the dude and the best receiver, then it's a disappointment. It's time to move on. I'm not saying that at all. I think that could maybe be next season. But what I do think Deion has to do is he has to take a step forward. I've talked to a lot of people around the program, and the one thing that I constantly hear about Deion Colsey is he has all the talent in the world, and when he's on, he's really good. It's just trying to get Deion to understand what it takes to be that guy every day. And I think that's something that Deion must continue to learn. And if that light goes on for him, he could be a difference maker for Notre Dame this year. Like, look, he's 6'5". He's 215 or so pounds. He's a lot faster than people think. There was a play in one of the spring practices we were at where he was going against Benjamin Morrison in a one-on-one. There was no pump fake. There was no double move. There was nothing. He just stuck that outside post and beat Benjamin Morrison to the post, folks, by like 4 or 5 yards, just flat out. There was about 1.5 yard, 2 yard difference out of the break because he beat Benjamin out of the break, but then he just pulled away from him. as he won the post. And you're like, wow, that's impressive. But how did that rep end? Deion drops the football. And I think those are the frustrations that you see with Deion is this kid has all the talent in the world. He's an awesome kid. I mean, you look at some of the things he's involved in off the field and the type of student he is, and there's a lot to love about Deion Colzie as a young man, and there's a lot to love about his talent, but he just has not figured out yet how to be that guy consistently. And when you're trying to accomplish the things that Notre Dame is trying to accomplish this season, you need guys to be that. I need to know that you're going to answer the bell week after week after week. That's huge for a coach. If I'm a position coach and I'm going to say, hey, look, I know Jaden Thomas is going to answer the bell every week. The focus is going to be there. The effort's going to be there. If we get him the football, he's going to go try to make a play on it. And you say maybe he doesn't have the raw tools that Deion Colzie has, but I know he's going to answer the bell every day. And I've got Chris Tyree tearing it up in the slot, and I've got Jaden Greathouse coming along. And boy, that could be a really impact 1-2 punch there. And with Deion, it's like, man, on Tuesday he's an all-star. On Wednesday he's just not there, just not locked in, not playing well. Thursday it's up and down. 1 week he may come out against NC State and light the world on fire, just dominate NC State secondary, which he is more than capable of, and then come out the next week and you're just like, he's struggling to get open against Central Michigan. That's been some of the issue with Deion Colzie, but you still continue to put him out there because those great moments are so good. And so I think this is really now about Deion. And I think that Deion battled through some adversity last season in some areas that I hope helped him really grow. I think he could have been a guy that could have easily just walked away if he wanted to, and he chose to stay in battle. And I'm hopeful that he gained some confidence this spring. My hope is that he takes that confidence building and rises it to another level in the summer. I think that's what everybody around the program is waiting on. It's like, okay, you showed some flashes this spring. Now let's take that sucker to another level. Because if Deion Colzie is consistently the better version of himself, not the best, because nobody brings their A+ game every day, but just where the focus is there, the production is there, the effort is there, he's locked in, he's doing what he needs to do. He's a more talented player, in my opinion, than Miles Boykin. He's got as much production as Miles Boykin did through 3 years, and Deion's done it in 2. So I think Deion Colzie has a chance to have a Miles Boykin type of jump a year early. The question is a lot like Miles. Will the light go on for him? And that was always the question with Miles. And what we hear about Deion now is very similar to what we heard about Miles Boykin in his career. Like, boy, there's times where this kid is our best receiver. And then there's times where you're just like, I can't justify putting him on the field. That's what we heard a lot about Miles. I haven't heard quite the lows from Deion that we would hear from Miles. But when Miles decided, you know what, I'm going to be that dude, he went out that spring. Now, this is going into his senior year where Deion's just going into his junior year. So it took Miles a year longer. You hope that Deion can figure it out a little bit sooner. But we watched that spring before the 2018 season, and we're watching Troy Pride and especially Julian Love just consistently just get dominated by Miles Boykin. And then he went out in the season and had, obviously, especially once Ian Book stepped into lineup, and had a really impactful year. And so Deion can be that kind of player. And if he does, then this offense is going to be very, very dangerous, because now if you've got that boundary guy that's making those kind of plays, you can move Jaden Thomas there as part of rotation. You can put Jaden outside, you put him in the slot. And all of a sudden you've got the 6'5", 215-pound, 4'5", long player that can make a lot of plays. But here's the flip side of it. We all know that's what Deion can be, right? The question, however, is will he do it? And if not, how do you handle that as a coaching staff? So if Deion comes out this summer and fall camp, he's just kind of the same guy. Just a talented guy, but just not that guy every day. As a coaching staff, you have to start making decisions about, I just don't know if this is something we can keep waiting on. We've got an Ohio State game to win. We've got a USC, Duke, Louisville, Pitt, NC State, Clemson. We've got some big games to win. We have to go with what we know and what we can trust. And that would, to me, that would mean maybe moving a Jaden Thomas outside of the boundary more. Maybe you say, hey, look, we got to push Braylon James to get ready sooner. Maybe you move Rico Flores over there. Maybe you do more with Tobias there as part of a where you just go right left as opposed to field boundary and push the tempo a little bit more. So those are areas where I think if you're a coaching staff and he doesn't show up, consistently, you have to start making decisions. And then once that decision is made, it's hard to kind of then for a guy like Deion Colsey to climb back up when you've got a Braylon James you're competing against, a Jaden Greathouse. You've got Cam Williams coming in, Isaiah Canyon coming in, Micah Gilbert coming in. And so there comes a point in time with any coach where you just say, hey, look, I have to move forward. And this player has not given us what he needs to give us. And so we have to move forward, guys we can trust. That's really the scenario where Deion Colsey's entering that period. Now, this is not me saying that the Notre Dame coaches are thinking that. I've never heard that. I just know football, and I know how coaches think, and I know the period that Deion enters into. And I understand that if he does what he needs to do, boy, he'll be an impact player. And when you think about Sam Hartman specifically and why it's so important for this season, so there's the now or never for Deion's career, but there's also sort of the need for it for this football team. You have a quarterback who has thrown more deep passes than in the last 2 years than any quarterback in college football. You have a guy that loves throwing the ball down the field. We saw it all spring. We saw it in the spring game. We saw clips of him and Deion Colsey hooking up for really impressive plays. If Deion becomes that guy every day, I guarantee he's going to become a favorite target for Sam Hartman. He's going to look in the boundary and be like, I've got a one-on-one over there. I am looking the safety off and I'm coming back to the post, or I'm coming back to the go route, or I'm coming back to the deep stop route, because I know that this guy cannot guard Deion one-on-one. And even if he's covering Deion, he can't make that play. And, so we saw Deion just absolutely dominate Benjamin Morrison in a rep in a one-on-one. But then we go out there and watch him against Syracuse, and Tyler Buckner throws him a go route, and he just allows himself to kind of get ridden out of bounds. And you say, which one of those guys are going to step up? If the guy that dominates steps up more consistently, he will have a big year. There's no doubt, because he is exactly the type of player that Sam Hartman loves. And he's exactly the type of player that I think this offense needs and will promote for Jared Parker, is sort of that they're going to, if they want to throw the ball down the field, look at the Jaden Thomas post route in the spring game. That was Jaden Thomas playing an outside receiver. That was not a slot position. They want to throw the ball outside. They want to throw the ball down the field. And Deion could have a big, big role in that if he can take his game to that next level from a production standpoint, which then is a byproduct of a greater focus. And him, what we said about Deion from day one when they got him was, this is a young man that is so gifted that I don't think he understands the level of work and fire and just force needed to maximize his talent. If that day ever comes where he does understand that and embraces it, Deion can be special. I don't care if he catches 5 balls the next 2 years. I'll always believe the talent was there. It's just time for him to show it. And if he does, this is going to be a really fun year for Notre Dame. Now, one more player on offense I want to talk about, and that's Andrew Kristofic. This is a kid that I really liked a lot coming out of high school, and he's given Notre Dame some quality moments in his career. I thought inserting Andrew Kristofic and then Joe Alt into the starting lineup in 2021 really helped solidify that offensive line. It was never a dominant offensive line the rest of the year, but it was a solid offensive line. It was a unit that you looked at and said, hey, look, they're able to hold their own. They're able to protect the quarterback. They're able to do some different things, and they could go out and win a bunch of games down the stretch. Then you go into the 2022 season, and Andrew doesn't win one of the starting guard jobs, which I didn't necessarily expect him to. I expected Josh Lugg and Jarrett Patterson to win those jobs. But part of that was because in that spring, he got outplayed in a pretty big way by Zeke Correll. Not that they were at the same position, but Zeke had a big spring in 2022 spring. And it was one of those things where it's like, hey, Zeke's got to move to center, and then we're going to move Jared out to guard. If had Andrew had a better spring and Andrew outplayed Zeke in the spring, then you'd have left Jarrett Patterson at center, and then Andrew just steps in starting lineup, and Zeke continues to battle, and he's now stepping into a 2-year starting job now after Jared Patterson departing. But he didn't win that job, and so they made the move that they made. And so Andrew enters this season, and he goes into the spring with a chance to kind of solidify himself as the top guard on the roster. I don't believe he did that. He didn't do that in the practices we saw, and we just saw 2 of the 15. I don't think he necessarily did that in the blue gold game. And so now you enter the summer where Andrew's got a chance to be a good football player for Notre Dame and be a starter, but he's also now being challenged by some younger players. You've got obviously Billy Schrauth is, a regression from the spring away from no regression from the spring away from being a starter. I think he's pretty much got that locked down as long as there's no regression. And then now you've got Andrew, who I think does head into the summer as the presumptive starter. I do believe that he is the presumptive starter. I think he's earned that. I think he played well enough for that. But I don't think he did what I don't think Andrew did was just lock it down to where, hey, this is me. I got this. Rocco, you've got a chance to be really good. I know Jagasol's coming. I know that Absher's coming. I know that Pendleton's coming along. But hey, I got this. Right? This is me. And I don't think he did that. And I think he enters a period now where he needs to do that. I think Andrew needs to do that for a number of reasons, but primarily for himself. I thought Rocco Spindler had a really good finish to the spring. And I think with Rocco, he brings a little bit more of the when he's on his game and he's moving his feet, which was a big problem for him until late in the spring, he can move people. And I think that that's something that Andrew just has never kind of been able to do. He's never been a guy that can just come out and move people. What Andrew is just a do your job kind of guy. And I think what Notre Dame needs from him is to just be a little bit more, even more consistent in doing your job, but also to be a guy that just is a little bit more impactful. Maybe just a little bit better on the second level, just a little bit better in space, just a little bit more movement at the point of attack, and then finish a little bit better. And I think with Andrew, it's not this enormous jump where he's got to go from being where he is now to just this significantly better player. I think for Andrew, it's just one of those things where it's just, dude, I need you to be, you're a 5th-year senior. I need you to be this guy every day. I need you to be a leader, which I don't think is an issue, but I need you to just be a more impactful player. You've got 8-9 starts under your belt now. You've played a lot of football. I really need you to take your game to another level. If he does that, then he'll lock down the right guard spot, hold it down, and Notre Dame's going to be pretty good on the offensive line. If he doesn't, then as a staff, you have to decide, okay, 5th-year senior, he's still that same guy. Do we roll with it? Or do we maybe say we're going to give a guy that's a little bit more impactful, guy that's a little bit more physical, guy that's a little bit more talented, a guy that has more of the highs, and we're going to roll with him either as part of a rotation or just flat out at some point in time saying, hey, we're going to make this move. So I think this is a big moment for Andrew Kristofic. And a big season could do one of two things. Number one is it could say, hey, look, he had a good enough year to where now he can look at taking his talent to the National Football League. Or number two, he justifies being brought back for a 6th year and says, hey, look, Andrew had a great year. Let's get him back for a 6th season. Let's let him, have 2 years as a starter under his belt. And that's going to then put him in position to go be a player in the National Football League. So I think Andrew Kristofic is another guy that is in a bit of a now or never moment for Notre Dame. I think just a reminder to some people that join late, we will not be doing a mailbag today. On the Wednesday solo shows, we do not do a mailbag. So we will get to one. I'm going to go into the defensive aspect of this next, but no mailbag today. Just a reminder, I see some people putting mailbag in the chat. We will not be doing a mailbag today. I want to move over to the defense and talk about some of the players on defense. And I'm going to talk about 2 guys together. And there's 2 defensive linemen that for me, I look at and say, it's now or never. It's now or never from the standpoint of you're just never going to be that dude. You're going to be that guy that just flashes some plays here and there, but you're never going to be that impactful player. You're just not, you're not going to be that guy that has the potential that, boy, if you just give this guy more reps or do this or do that, these guys are just going to be those players. I think that for them individually, this is a now or never moment for them. But I also think for the Notre Dame defensive line and the Notre Dame defense as a whole, these two players emerging as an absolute must of this defense being a championship caliber defense. And it's two seniors. It's Riley Mills at 3 technique, and it's Jordan Patelho at Viper. I think when you look at these two players, they're guys that have shown flashes. Riley's had some big games in his career. I think back to the Virginia game when he got moved out to end when Myron Tungavaloa-Mose was out, and he had 2 sacks in that game. I think of the Wisconsin game in 2021 where Riley was really good. There was moments last year where Riley was really good. Jordan Patelho is another guy that has had some flashes at times, but just the consistency with these two players has never been there. There's a lot of reasons why. Some coaching, some just opportunity wasn't there. Jordan Patelho was sitting behind a second-round draft pick. I mean, how many reps were you really going to be able to give him when you're sitting behind Isaiah Foskey? And then you look at how he played early in the year, wasn't good. You look at how he played late in the year, really from Syracuse on, and it was a lot better. Riley Mills is just 1 week he's great, 1 week he's just kind of there. He's never bad, but he's just kind of there. So what are these guys going to do? They're seniors. They have fifth-year opportunities, but you're in a situation now where they've earned starting jobs. They're there. They're guys that you look at and say, hey, this is a guy that this is a guy that you want. This is a guy that you can build your defense around. We're going to build our defense around it. If you're looking at it from the coach's standpoint, they're starters. They're the dudes. We need them to step up. But if they don't, you say, well, I've got some young guys. I've got Gabriel Rubio's ascending. I've got some freshmen that want to get to play. I can easily move Jason Onye out to 3 technique. I can move Howard Cross out to 3 technique. If you can't get the job done, I have other options. With Viper, you've got Junior Tuialamaka. You've got Josh Burnham. You can go to a 3-3 stack. I mean, honestly, if Riley Mills steps up and none of the Vipers do, you can easily go to a 3-3 look. And I'm not a big fan of the 3-3, but I could put Riley Mills and Javonte Jean-Baptiste outside and have Howard Cross and Jason Onye and Gabriel Rubio working inside, working as the 5 techniques. Put Jack Kaiser, Maris Luafau, and J.D. Bertrand on the field, or J.D. Bertrand and Jack Kaiser and Jalen Sneed or Nolan Ziegler or somebody else if you're just not getting that play at Viper. And so to me, I think those are the things that I look at and say, with a guy like Jordan Patelho, and say, hey, this is your moment, dude. Like, this is your opportunity, right? You've been through some stuff. You've had an up and down career off the field. You seem to be past that. Now it's time to step up and be that guy. And if they don't do it, it's time to move on. At least from move on from the standpoint of they're going to play, but we're not going to build the defense around you, is the way that the coaches need to be. You're part of a rotation. You're not that dude. And so I think those two guys enter that. I'm actually really optimistic about how they're going to be. I really am. I'm very optimistic about what we're going to see from both Riley Mills and Jordan Patelho this season. I think that we've heard enough about him. From what I've been told, Riley had a really good spring. That consistency was there. The effort was there. And I don't know if you all have seen pictures of Riley, but we saw this at the practices this spring. He is massive. He is just an absolute monster of a human being now. I'll be shocked if he's not 300 pounds come the fall. But what I liked is he was still athletic. He was still a guy that could win at the snap. He could still penetrate and get up the field and be a disruptive player. That's what he needs to be this season. He needs to be more of that guy that can be disruptive, that can make plays in the backfield, that can push guards off the ball, that can block, destruct, get to the running back, get to the quarterback, and be that guy. With Jordan Patelho, he gives you a completely different type of Viper than what you had last year. You had a long, powerful, 6'5", 33 plus 34-inch arms in Isaiah Foskey. Really not a twitchy athlete as much as Patelho, I think, can be, but a more traditional edge player, a more traditional big physical edge player with speed, really good speed for the size. What Jordan Patelho brings to the table is more of a short, sawed-off, 6'2", good arm length, but not elite arm length for his size, 250-pound twitchy guy that has the speed and also the leverage to be a really athletic, disruptive edge player, but also can do some more traditional Viper things. He's a guy that can drop into coverage. He was a rover 2 years ago, for Pete's sake. He's a guy that can run with a wheel route even more consistently and effectively than Isaiah Foskey did. He's a guy that can drop underneath the hook curl or a curl route into his hook curl zone. He's a guy that you can stand up and move around even more effectively than what you did. And he's a guy that you can, in your base personnel, especially in your base nickel looks. So if you have like Thomas Harper or Clarence Lewis in the slot, with a guy like Jordan Botelho, because of his linebacker background, both in high school and in Notre Dame, you can, in your 4-2-5 personnel, line up in a 3-3 stack and trust that he can run in coverage, he can blitz, he can do a lot of different things. And so the things they tried to do 2 years ago with Foskey that just didn't work because Foskey's not that guy and they scrapped, you can do with Jordan Botelho. Will they do it? I don't know. These are just different options that he brings to the table. But it's a situation where the talent behind him is too good in Junior Tuihalamaka and Josh Burnham to say we're going to continue to deal with the inconsistency. Because if he's an inconsistent player from a focus standpoint, from an effort standpoint, well, I don't know if I've ever heard anyone question Jordan's effort. So I take that part back. But a consistency standpoint and a production standpoint, then you're just going to say, hey, look, we're going to just keep him as a rotation guy. He's the starter, but he's going to be one of 3 guys that plays a lot. If he is the breakout guy that you hope he can be, then now all of a sudden you can use those 2 young players as more, hey, we're going to bring Junior in for this role. We're going to bring Josh in for this role, and it makes your Viper depth chart so good. Look, this is a team that has a chance to make a run at a college football playoff make a run at a college football playoff berth appearance, right? A college football playoff appearance. Good Lord, I'm going to get it out. And I think a team that has a chance, if some things go right and some certain guys break out and have big jumps in production, this team could go out and compete for a championship. I think Chris Tyree and Deion Colsey are guys that could be that kind of burst players where their jump makes this team to dynamic to the point where this offense is championship caliber, along with some other guys, but they are keys to that. I think these 2 guys are the number 1 and number 2, 1A, 1B players, in my opinion, that can do the same thing for the Notre Dame defense. If one of them breaks out, it's good. It's going to make the defensive line really good. If they both break out, then this defensive line could be really, really good because we know what Howard Cross can bring to the table. The depth is there. Javonte Jean-Baptiste is a bit of an unknown, but if he can just do what he did at Ohio State on a more higher volume level, he's going to be a quality football player and give them more pass rush production they've had the last 2 years from that position. But if this is going to be a championship defensive line, it's not going to be Jason Onye and Gabriel Rubio most likely stepping up and being that guy. It's got to be Riley Mills. It's probably not going to be Junior Tuihalamaka and Josh Burnham this year. 24 is when I'm expecting those guys to be the breakout, fuels of a fuel drivers of the drivers of a championship caliber defense. But this year, it's got to be Riley and Jordan Botelho. And if they don't step up and be that guy, then you've got to make sure that you keep them as rotation guys and not make them full-time guys. And if they do break out, this defensive line is going to be really, really dangerous and really, really good. So they're 2 guys that I absolutely have my eye on when I look at just really being keys to Notre Dame stepping up. There's another guy on defense. I think this one's going to be easy. This is a now or never moment for Marist Liufau. He's had plenty of opportunities at Notre Dame. I mean, he was the leader in snaps last year. Actually, I think for the entire defense. Now that I think about it, I think he was the leader in snaps for the entire defense. Let me just look that up here real quick on profootballfocus.com. So they actually do a good job of tracking snaps for teams. So Marist Liufau led this football team by 35 snaps, 35 total snaps last year. And there's nothing about his quality of play that should justify that. J.D. Bertrand would have done that had he not gotten kicked out of a couple games for targeting. But he was that guy. And the reality is he just wasn't very good. And I don't understand why they kept throwing him out there, but he enters the season now where it's a dereliction of duty as a coach to keep throwing him out there if he plays the way he did last year. And that's just the reality of it. Marist has to be way better than he was last year. And if he's not, then you need to play Nolan Ziegler. You need to play, maybe move Jack Kaiser there, and have him and Nolan Ziegler rotate at will. Maybe have Jalen Sneed play more at Rover and go to more of a true nickel. I don't care what you do. Play Jaden Alsbury. Play Drake Bowen. I really don't care. You have too much talent in the freshman and sophomore class to keep putting a guy on the field who plays the way that Marist did last year. And if the excuse is, well, they don't know the defense, that's a you problem, coach. That's a you problem. That's not a player problem. That's a you problem. Either teach them the defense or simplify things enough to where those guys can play. Because putting a veteran out there that knows the defense but can't make any plays and hurt you a lot of times is not good football. That's what Brian Van Gorder did with Joe Schmidt 2015, and that's bad coaching. I'm not saying Al Golden's going to do that. I'm saying that's what it is if he's going to justify that, if Maris plays the way he did last year. However, Maris didn't stop being athletic. Maris didn't stop being a guy that can be productive. Maris didn't stop being a guy that flashed the way that he did in 2020. You have to ask yourself, like, okay, is he now a year removed from the injury that he had that cost him the 2021 season, and he's ready to kind of take his game to another level? Does the second year in the defense help him to master the defense a little bit more, to where the mistakes, the being out of position, the hitting the wrong gaps, the silly face mask penalties, I only got like 2 of them last year, just like, what are you doing? Can he now eliminate those things? Now he's in year 2 of the defense, and now that he's, a year healthier, he maybe plays a little bit more speed. That he didn't just stop being a talented athlete. And the guy that had us so excited last season didn't just disappear. He didn't come out this year and run a 4.9. He's still a really athletic player. He's just a guy that has not been a very good football player so far. So he enters a season where it's now or never for Marist. He might be the epitome of the now or never conversation, because you can't keep throwing him out there if he was what he was. You have too much talent behind it. But if the light goes on for Marist, he can be a really good football player. Now, listen, let's be honest about this. There's some Notre Dame fans that will not give him his due unless he has like a 14 tackle for loss, 8 sack season. That's the reality of it. And he'll play 60 good snaps and have 2 mistakes, 2 missed assignments like everybody does. And that's just all some people are going to focus on if he doesn't have monster numbers. I get all that. I don't care about that. I'm talking practically speaking. If Marist can be consistent and be more decisive and be a little bit more productive from a block destruction standpoint, because he just got himself blocked too easily last year, he's got all the physical tools to be productive. Brandon Plensner earlier talked about Asmar Bilal being one of those now or never players. Asmar Bilal wasn't any better than what Maris Liufau was last year prior to 2019. He wasn't. And Maris, and the light went on for him. If Maris can have that type of breakout season, he really can. He's capable of it, and I hope he does, because I've never heard a bad thing about Marist as a young man, as a worker. I've never heard anything negative about him. He just doesn't play very well. So if the light goes on, now all of a sudden you've got a 6'3", athletic, rangy, long player that can do a lot of different things on the football field. And now you can use your younger players like Nolan Ziegler and Jalen Sneed and Drake Bowen and guys like that, Jaden Alsbury, as more rotation guys, and then they're building to take over in 2024. That's what Maris can be. And there's a big range between what he could be and what he is. How far along he goes down that path is going to determine if he's a starter, if he's a rotation guy, or what he is. And this staff has to, and to me, this staff absolutely has to be in a situation where they're willing to put veterans on the bench if they're not playing well enough. There's too much talent to not do that. There's another guy on the team, it's safety, that I'm going to talk about. I have some people in the chat talk about Xavier Watts. I'm not going with Xavier Watts here. To me, Xavier Watts is a year and a half into being a safety. He's not in a now or never moment. He's going to play a lot this year, but Xavier still has a lot of eligibility left. So this season, next season. So next season will be more of when I get into that conversation for Xavier Watts. For me, it's Ramon Henderson. Ramon is an interesting player. He's a guy that came to Notre Dame. I didn't have him ranked really high in the class, but I had him with a high upside grade. He's a guy that I looked at and said, boy, this guy's got a lot of length, some athleticism. He's strong for his size in high school, but is he a football player or not? And he was a little bit more effective in high school as a receiver really than a DB. Comes to Notre Dame, plays corner, and he's just not natural there. And moves to safety. And his first game as a safety, he has a huge impact. He has an interception against a great interception against Virginia that looked a lot like the play that Kyle Hamilton made early in the year against Florida State. Has a tackle for loss coming off the edge, and just was kind of up and down the rest of the year. This past season, same thing, just up and down throughout the season. At times, Ramon was really good, and at times he just was kind of like not sure of himself. I don't think Ramon had a lot of like bad plays. He just had a lot of He's just kind of there, plays, which for some players is okay. For DJ Brown, it's like, dude, just be where you need to be every play. Don't make mistakes. Just be in the right position, make the tackle. I don't need you to have 5 interceptions and 12 pass breakups. Just do your job. For a guy like Ramon, the reason he enters a now or never season, it's not that he's in a now or never like he's not going to play. Ramon's not like Maris. He's been better than that. But the question is he just going to be a rotation guy, or does the light go on and Ramon becomes a difference maker? That's the question. And that's what Ramon, in my opinion, is capable of from an athleticism, size, and range standpoint. He's never shown that consistently as a football player. And so I don't know if it's there or not. But if the athleticism and the raw talent in that regard can translate into production, Ramon's got a chance to be a really good player. There's another reason that I don't have Xavier Watts on this list. Fair or not, there's just a level of assumption that I have that Xavier's going to be a good football player this year. He showed it last year when he really got thrust into the rotation late in the year and became a guy that was just playing in a lot more consistent basis. He was really good. And that started, I believe, it was around like the Clemson game. He started getting a lot more reps, Syracuse a little bit, but he was good against Clemson. He was really good against Navy. He was really good against Boston College. He was really good against USC. And I thought he was really good against South Carolina as well. And so he had one blown assignment, but I think the kind of whole secondary messed up on that one. But when you look at Xavier, I just have an expectation, fair or not, that he's just going to be a pretty good football player. With Ramon, the question is, does Ramon become that like sidekick, like 2018 sidekick, like they had with Alohi Gilman and Jalen Elliott, where they were just, man, these two guys are really good. I think of Harrison Smith and Jamora Slaughter in 2011. You know, I look at some of these tandems they've had, Jerome Sapp, Glenn Earl back in 2002. A lot of times when Notre Dame's had really great defenses, they've had a really impactful 1-2 punch at safety. And I expect Xavier to be that. The question now is, can Ramon be that? And if Ramon can have a breakout season for Notre Dame, then the safety position becomes a strength, in my opinion. And if that becomes a strength, this defense could be really dynamic and dangerous. So when you look at Ramon, the now or never is more about that. If he can't put it together now, then I just don't think that ever happens. I think he's a situation where if the light doesn't go on now, then that's just who he is. He's an athletic guy. That's just not a natural football player. You know, he's a senior now, and he's been a DB his whole career. And I know he moved from corner to safety, but Xavier moved from receiver to rover to safety. So I think if the light doesn't go on, and he'll be a nice, solid rotation guy, but you're going to realize as a staff that, hey, we just don't have a difference maker there. Then you ask, okay, does he lose snaps to Antonio Carter, depending on how quickly he transitions? Does he lose snap to DJ Brown? There's a lot of questions there about how much he'll play. He'll be in the rotation, but does he become a niche player, or does he become an every down guy? And if Ramon can force his way into the field as an every down player, then he's going to be really, really good. Really, really good. Last guy for me, this is an interesting one. My last now or never player for Notre Dame is Sam Hartman. Now, this is not a now or never from the standpoint of, is Cam going to start? Like a lot of these guys, it's like, are they going to start or not? Cam was a good football player. And he'll be a good football player this year. But he's a fifth-year senior, and it's now or never for if he's going to become a dominant, consistent force. And I look at Notre Dame right now, and I see Benjamin Morse, and I expect him to be a good football player this year. And I think he's going to be one of the better cornerbacks in the country. But for a lot of last season, Cam Hart was their best corner for a big chunk of the season. But with Cam, it's always been he just doesn't execute and play consistently from snap to snap and game to game. He's now a veteran. I mean, he's now third full year as a cornerback. I have a feeling, and again, I could be wrong, if he stays healthy, I have a feeling that Cam Hart's going to have a breakout season for Notre Dame. But he's just kind of that guy we're always talking about this with, right? Like, oh, this is the year that Cam Hart has the breakout. This is the year that Ramon Henderson has the breakout, because this is the year that Maris Luafau has the breakout. You know, all those, we've had these conversations with them before. Does the light go on for Cam from the standpoint of, okay, I was good last year, and at times I was really good, but this year just being good or really good isn't good enough. I can be great. And I think Cam wants to be that guy. The question now is, can he have the focus? Can he have the consistency from a technique standpoint to go out there and do that snap after snap after snap, to trust himself and trust his technique more, to not get grabby in some of the bigger games, to trust his speed and his ability and be healthy enough to go out there and do it every game. I think it's an opportunity for, I've always felt Cam had the physical tools to be one of the best corners in college football. Now's his sort of his last chance to prove that. So he's in a different now or never situation because he's going to be a good football player for Notre Dame this year if he's healthy. There's not a range of Marist and Ramon and Andrew and some of these other guys, Deion Colesy, what's he going to be? We know Cam's at least going to be here as long as he's healthy. But can he take his game to that next level and be an All-American type of player? That's the now or never question for Cam Hart. So those are guys, to me, when I look at a lot of veteran players, there's others we could discuss. Those are the guys for me that I really look at and say, hey, them stepping up this season are going to be impactful. And these guys are earning their last chance to, really in a lot of cases, their last chance to start to give us a reason why we need to keep rolling forward with you. And the more guys from this list that answer that bell, the better this Notre Dame football team is going to be in 2023. Let's go to number two. Topic number two today is going to be a recruiting topic. And this is really about Notre Dame entering a crossroads from a recruiting standpoint. And some of this is tied into a team standpoint. And this is what it really comes down to. Right now, Marcus Freeman is still a hot name on the recruiting trail. We talk to kids and we talk to parents all the time still to this day that just rave about Marcus Freeman. And he's building something special and he's doing these type of things. And so there's still a lot of momentum from Notre Dame. And I know that some fans have looked at this recruiting class and with a more negative viewpoint at times in ways where I don't necessarily think they should. I think there's situations where the recruiting has been a lot better than it's given credit for, especially on offense. There's some defensive players that are underrated, but there are still holes in this class. And there are still some question marks about whether or not this recruiting operation is good enough to truly take it to that next level. They're close, but they're not there yet. Last year's class was close, but it wasn't there yet across the board. It was the best recruiting class they've had in a while. But it wasn't a class to me that I looked at and said they closed the gap, but it wasn't as good as it could have been with a Keon Keeley and some other players like that. It just wasn't. Then you look into this year's class and you look at, okay, they've got a chance to kind of get another guy like that, Justin Scott, Elijah Rushing, some other players that you look at and say, hey, boy, if they can make this kind of impact. And in a lot of ways, they've built on some momentum. Offensively, they're building on the momentum that we've had because Coach Freeman made good hires. And so when I look at the crossroads that Notre Dame is entering, it's really over the next year. It begins with a very short period of time that's happening right now that's going to go a long way towards determining the success of the 24 class. And the 24 class is interesting, and we'll get into that in a second, but it's also the long-term aspect of is finishing 24 off right, but also Notre Dame's bringing a lot of 25 kids on campus. They're shifting a lot of their focus on certain positions onto 2025. Which is smart. Their 24 board right now is less than 10 guys at this point in time. So it's really twofold, but it has to start with finishing 24 off. And that's the first one. And so what are the short-term, the short-term sort of crossroad that they're at? Number one, holding on to your commits. Notre Dame has had a commit in the 24 class, a decommitment in the 24 class. That was from Owen Wafel. They've had two, actually. Brandon Davis-Swain was also someone who decommitted, but I think they've made up for that one. They've got players just as good, if not better, than Brandon, who's a good football player. Don't get me wrong. Owen Wafel, we'll find out if they can have that. So they've had a couple decommitments. I don't know that the Notre Dame coaching staff has really shooken up about either one of those. Brandon Davis-Swain's situation was different than Owen Wafel's. Obviously, Owen Wafel's a guy that I don't think they wanted in the class anymore. Brandon Davis-Swain is a guy that when he left the class, I don't think they were upset about it for a host of reasons. So I don't view those two decommitments as sort of impact decommitments. A big key moving forward in this 24 class is you cannot lose guys like you did last year. They've got to hold the 19 kids they have in the class right now together. Now you have to build on it. You have to finish this class off strong. But you can't have situations where you lose a Keon Keeley. You lose a Dylan Edwards. You lose a Peyton Bowen. You lose a Brandon Hillman. Now, they lost all those guys for different reasons, but the fact is they lost those guys. And those are the kind of guys that you'd like to have, especially Keeley, Bowen, and Hillman. So now Notre Dame enters in a situation where they have to keep this class together. They have to keep the ends that they currently have in the class. They can't afford to lose any of them. You can't afford to lose a Leonard Moore. And I'm not saying any of these guys are concerns about leaving. I don't know of a single kid in this class right now that I'm worried about decommitting. But there was a long time I wasn't worried about Keon Keeley decommitting. I wasn't concerned about Brandon Hillman decommitting because he didn't. He was going to come, but circumstances were such that they lost him. They have to avoid those. They have to make sure that they keep these 19 kids in the class. That's step one. Step two is you've got to finish strong. And at some positions, it's just about capping off, your class the right way. And others, it's your class is going to ultimately be defined. Your position group is going to be defined by this. And then part of the short and long-term evaluation is you have to go out there and be willing to make tough decisions as a coach. And sometimes it's, hey, I got this guy on my staff that I love him. He's a great guy. I have faith in him. I think he can do this really well, but he's not getting the job done from a recruiting standpoint. And one of the mistakes that head coaches can make is it's really two. It's one mistake, but it can be done in two ways. It can be an error, mistake in two ways. One is you're just not wanting to fire a guy, period. And number two is you end up moving on from a guy, but it's too late. And so I think that's the evaluation that Coach Freeman needs to be having primarily with his defensive staff right now, is figuring that answer out. And the finish in 2024 is going to determine that in a lot of ways. And so Notre Dame is in a very unique crossroad in this regard from the recruiting standpoint. And we're going to begin with the defensive line. Obviously, you're not going to get Elijah Rushing. You had your chance this weekend to make that move. I don't fault the Notre Dame coaching staff for why the visit didn't go the way that they had hoped at all. I think they put their best foot forward with Elijah Rushing. You win some, you lose some. That's how I chalk it up, that one up. That's always going to happen. Bama's going to lose some guys. Ohio State's going to have losses. Clemson's going to have losses. Georgia's going to have losses. You win some, you lose some. And the reason that they're going to lose Elijah Rushing, to me, is not something that there's not a lot you can do about that. So now you're in a situation where your entire defensive line class is going to be defined by what you do with Justin Scott. I love the defensive end class. Elijah Rushing is a really talented player, but he was icing on the cake. We talked about this. I love Logan Thomas and Cole Mullins and Bryce Young as a three-man group. I love that group. I think Cole Mullins is one of the most underrated players in college football or in high school football. I think he's a top 150 guy that borders on being a top 100 guy. And the only reason he borders is because I just haven't seen him play defensive end as much because he plays middle linebacker at 6'4", 240. When you look at Logan Thomas, he's got all the talent in the world. He's just got to fill out and do some things, but the upside is there. They're very talented players. And then you look at Sean Silviano. I've made my opinion known about him. I think that what the coaching staff is sold on him, and I hope that they're right, but they needed beef. They wanted beef, and they got beef in Sean Silviano, who, by the way, I loved the picture he put out of his family. And I went back and looked at his Instagram page because, try to find some photos used for stories. And he has his little sister. I think it's his little sister. In almost every school he went to that he did a photo shoot, he would bring his little sister into the photos. And I just think that's really cool. I don't know why. And it doesn't have anything to do with him being a football player, but I just think that's really cool. But, so he's a guy that you look at and say, okay, he met a need. But at the end of the day, this class is going to be defined by what they do from the standpoint of filling out with Justin Scott. So here's where things are right now. Miami and Georgia, the southern schools are battling for him. Michigan's the northern school that's battling for him. I think Notre Dame has been kind of back and forth with him. They're trying now to get him. I don't know who he's going to commit to this summer if he does, but if you're Notre Dame, you stay in the fight till the very end. I'm probably more optimistic today than I was 2 weeks ago about getting Justin Scott, but it's a long, long way to go. A long, long way to go. And so, but at the end of the day, you got to get it done. There's just no excuse to not get that done. If you don't get that done, you have to start seriously asking yourself the question of, do we have someone recruiting the defensive line that's good enough to recruit at an elite level? And here's why this matters, because You have to hold the defensive line coach and the offensive line coach to a different standard than you do everyone else. Why? Because the head football coach has said that we are going to be a line-driven program. That means if you're going to be competing for national championships, it's because of your lines. You can't do that if you're not recruiting at an elite level. Now, to me, recruiting at an elite level does not mean you're getting a bunch of five-star players. You all know my stance on that. Give me five-star talent. I don't care where they're ranked, right? To me, Logan Thomas, Cole Mullins, if you give me a Logan Thomas and a Cole Mullins in every single class moving forward, defensive end is going to be loaded, right? But you have not been able to recruit very well in the interior. You got Devin Houston last year's the only true interior player. This year, Sean Sevillano is your only true interior player. Now, maybe some ends can grow into there, but you don't have a lot of pure interior players. I think Al Washington has proven he can recruit the edge player to a quality degree. But can you go out and really get the best of the best that are out there, especially ones in your backyard? And if you can't get Justin Scott, then you have to ask yourself serious questions about that. On the flip side, again, because the Crossroads, one of two directions. The flip side of that is if Al Washington can kind of overcome some early blunders to get Justin Scott, it means he will have to put some work in. Now, it's not going to be just him. Marcus Freeman's part of that. Chad Bowden's part of that. They've had a big role in really bringing Notre Dame back into this. But if at the end of the day, if it's going to be a sealed deal, it's not going to be because of Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden. It's got to be because of Al Washington. If he gets Justin Scott when it's all said and done, then you start to say, okay, now he's answered that challenge. First full cycle, if some ups and downs, that's how it's going to be. Don't care about that. It's what do you have that signs on the dotted line? That's what it's going to be. And so that's where Notre Dame is at in this regard. So they have to get him. Linebacker is a similar situation. Notre Dame has recruited linebacker extremely well the last couple of seasons. But that was Marcus Freeman driving that. He's not driving linebacker recruiting anymore. It's now about Al Golden and Max Bulla, mainly Al Golden. Can he recruit the way you need to? Notre Dame, I'm fine with Notre Dame taking Teddy Rizek and Bodie Cahoon in this class. Totally fine with it. Because of how well you recruited the last 2 years, the fact it's not a great linebacker class, period, there are not a lot of guys to me that kind of bring the upside that those kids bring to the table. There's some, there's not a lot. And so I'm good with that. But at some point in time, you got to go out and say, hey, look, we literally got beat on almost every top linebacker we went after if you can't get Kingston Viliama-Asa. What it tells me is, hey, you're good at identifying these sleeper prospects like Bodie Cahoon and Teddy Rizak, and I'm good with that. But you got your butt whooped by the big boys. You got your butt whooped by, for Chris Cole. You got your butt whooped for Sammy Brown, who I didn't think they were going to get anyway. But you got your butt whooped there. You got your butt whooped for Chris Jones. You got your butt whooped with Aaron Childs. You got your butt whooped with Kingston Viliama-Asa. If you can't land him, then Marcus Freeman's going to have to make some really tough decisions when it comes to linebacker recruiting and who's driving it and how it needs to go, because it's going to have to get better. And now if you get Kingston, you can say, okay, number one, you get an assist to Al Washington, who's played a big role in that recruitment as well. And so that's a feather in his cap on top of if he can get Justin Scott. But you look at it and say, hey, look, here's where you're at. You were able to, in a down year at linebacker, you were able to get Kingston Viliama-Asa, and you were able to beat out USC and Ohio State to do it. You were able to get a guy like Bodie Cahoon, who you beat North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia Tech for. High upside kid, little raw, hasn't played linebacker for a long time, but 6'3", 210, athletic, rangy, brings a lot of talent to the table. And then you found this gem in Teddy Rizak out in Nebraska. I don't know why other people don't offer. I don't care. I just go by what the film says. I look at the kid show up at the official visit, and he's like 6'4", and he's long, he's athletic. And you say, okay, give me guys like that in a year where it's a down year. But you take away Kingston from the class, and all of a sudden it's a completely different outlook. And so I think that's the crossroads, is finishing there. And then finally, safety. We're going to have a lot to say on the message board when the whole safety recruiting is done. We're going to have a lot to say about how we got there, good and bad. But you're in a situation where you've got Kennedy Urlacher in the class. Good player. I like the ceiling. Needs a lot of work. Needs a lot of room for development. Then you have a situation where you have Bronte Johnson, who you've got to close on the next couple weeks. And then if you are able to close on the next couple of weeks, then you're in a situation where now you've got to make sure he stays on top of all the things so he doesn't become into a Brandon Hillman situation. From the work that he's put in so far, I don't think that's going to be the case. And Brandon's situation was unique, the things that led to him. So I look at it and say, if you can get a Bronte Johnson, you're now going to be defined in this safety class by who you get as your third guy. Now, here's the deal. Al Washington is on his first full class in Notre Dame. And so if you don't get Justin Scott, you need to look at and say, hey, you're now entering a make or break year in the 25 class. I think Chris O'Leary's in it already. I think Chris O'Leary's now going in his third recruiting class. Second, for sure, full recruiting class. I actually think it's third. I'm still trying to figure out 2021 and how I feel about that one, or 2022. But here's the reality of it. You completely struck out at safety in 2022. You landed 2 good football players last year, but you didn't meet your numbers needs. And you didn't have any really high level players. Adon Schuler and Ben Minich are good football players. Those are very good additions. But when a year after you didn't get an impact guy or anybody, you needed a third guy just from a pure number standpoint. And you needed another third impact player. They didn't get it. Now you look at the 23 class, and I like Kennedy, or 24 class, and I like Kennedy Urlacher a lot, but he's a lower floor, higher ceiling guy. Bronte Johnson's a guy that I like a lot. If you can finish off with him, that's a really good step in the right direction. That third guy is going to determine how we view this class. Because if the third guy is more of a Kennedy Urlacher type of player, then this isn't good enough. You're trying to win a championship. This isn't good enough. If your third guy can be a higher level player, then you're going to be good enough. And I'm very curious to see who they end up with. They passed on Paul Menke, and we'll have some backstory on that. Things are not looking good right now for Oliver Miles. And so you're looking at a situation where Jalen McLean's already committed somewhere else. Davis Andrews is probably going to take a mission as of right now. That's the plan, that he's going to take a mission. Maybe he changes his mind, and that would solve a lot of problems. But I don't think it solves problems if he's going to come in, play as a freshman, and then leave like Kahanu Kia. I still don't think that solves the problem. So you go back to it, and you get into a situation where you have to start determining if this is just going to be good enough to get the job done, and say, I don't know who's out there. I don't know who they're going to get if they can't get Malcolm Ziegler, who's on campus this weekend. So unless they can pull a rabbit out of their hat somehow, you're going to look at it and say, boy, I don't know if this is just going to get it done. Now, Malcolm Ziegler, if you get Malcolm Ziegler, here's the interesting thing. So I know the staff wanted Oliver Miles, and they made a push for him, and I don't think as of right now it's going to happen for Notre Dame. Sometimes, however, you can miss on a guy, and it ends up being better for you in the long run because you end up getting a better player. Right now, Notre Dame is trailing some other schools for Malcolm Ziegler. I think he likes the kind of the East Coast schools. I think he's a better safety than anybody they have left on the board. Jalen McLean was my top guy. I don't count Davis Andrews as being on the board, although by the way, for the record, I'm way higher on Davis Andrews than most people are. I think he's a top 150 player with a lot of talent. If he wasn't playing in Utah, people would view him a lot differently. So you have him that's not really on the board anymore as of right now. DeJuan Lane's not on the board anymore. There's really not anybody on the board that I view as being a top guy. And I look at Malcolm Ziegler and say, he's in the conversation for one of those top 3 spots at safety. Now, I think Bronte Johnson has as high of a ceiling as anybody on the board. But he's going to have to fill out and get stronger and all that kind of stuff. But he's got a lot of talent. Malcolm Ziegler, to me, also has a very high ceiling, but he has a higher floor. He's a corner in high school, and he's very fast. I think he's run like a 10.7, and he's like 6'2", plays mostly corner in high school, willing tackler, great long speed, a guy that, to me, projects even better to safety than he does corner. If you can finish with a guy like him, then safety recruiting is in a great spot. And you say, okay, did Chris O'Leary step up and answer the bell? Yeah, he did. If you can't get Ziegler, because you're now in a spot where I don't know who's left, unless you can pull a rabbit out of your hat somehow, this is going to be a tough situation. And then who pulls the rabbit out of their hat? Is it Marcus Freeman? Is it Chad Bowden? Is it somebody else? And then you can say, well, hey, it worked out, but it didn't work out because of that guy. And then you have to make some tough decisions. So this is a make or break period for Chris O'Leary. He's almost kind of like the now or never version from a coaching standpoint. We could have talked about it there, because to be a championship coach at a place like Notre Dame, you can't just be a good position coach. You have to be able to recruit, especially the skill positions. And that's where we're at. Now, part of this crossroads to me is Notre Dame is in a situation where the 22 class had some high-level players, but it had too many misses. You didn't get a top quarterback. You fell short of numbers at receiver. You completely whiffed at safety. You came up short numbers on the defensive line. Now, there were talented players in the class, and you've had to then move linebackers to the defensive line. So now your number one ranked linebacker class, in my opinion, is down 2 guys because you had to move them to the defensive line to somewhat ease the concerns you had there. I think Josh Burnham might have eventually moved there anyway, but I think part of the reason you had to move Junior Tuihalamaka there is out of need. Not just because you thought it could play there, but out of need. And that's not where you want to be, because now you've hurt yourself in another position because you don't have a guy that I thought could have been a really good middle linebacker in college and Junior Tuihalamaka there. So they're in a tough spot, in my opinion. They're in a really tough spot there at linebacker, but you were able to recover it with a really good 2023 class. And so you look at 2024, we've had some conversations about it. But, you were able to somewhat recover with 23. The 23 class was Notre Dame's best class in a long time, in my opinion, because of the balance. You were a safety short of hitting all your needs in the back end of the defense. You were a Viper short of hitting a specific position need. You needed 4 linemen. They got 4 linemen. They just were missing a Viper. You hit a home run on offense. You got a really talented top 100 caliber quarterback. You got one of the best running backs in high school football last year. You got one of the best receiver classes in the country. You got arguably the best tight end in the country for what you were looking for in the class. Not the best tight end in the country, but arguably the best tight end in the country for what your need was in the class. You were looking for a traditional tight end. And I would argue that last season, Cooper Flanagan was one of the very best in the country at the things that they were looking for in the class. You got a top 5 caliber offensive line class. You've got a very talented defensive line class with a low floor, high ceiling, but still 4 talented players. You had one of the best linebacker classes in the country, one of the best cornerback classes in the country. And even though you fell up short in your numbers at safety, the 2 guys you got are good football players. So it was a great top to bottom class. And that's what Notre Dame needs to do regularly. So part of this crossroads is finishing 24, but then also, can you keep building momentum for 25? 24 as a national class, to me, is interesting. Notre Dame has talked a lot of, some of my sources, I should say, have talked a lot about getting up to 25, 26 this year. And I've said that's cool if you can get the right guys, but you better get the right guys. Talk about a Carter Nelson at tight end. All right, cool. This is important. You talk about Elijah Rushing, Justin Scott, guys like that, Elijah Rushing is not a need. He's a want. That's cool. You got your second running back. But they have to, if they can finish strong with the safety class, Justin Scott, and a linebacker, Carter Nelson, this is a great class in a year that wasn't a great year. And that's a bit of the concern. So when I look at it in that standpoint, that also is what makes this finish so important. If you can get Carter Nelson and Gearby Lambert on offense, and you can get Justin Scott and Kingston Viliama-Asa and Bronte Johnson and a Malcolm Ziegler type of guy at safety, all of a sudden you've met all your needs, and it's an outstanding top 5 caliber class, in my opinion. But then it's like, okay, did you have that nice back-to-back 1-2, or are you in a situation where you're now taking that step back? You've lost that momentum. And this is kind of the point that I've talked about. And what I've always felt is when you look at the success Alabama had, for example, recruiting back in 2008, Alabama was in a situation where, they were really, they were in a situation where their first couple recruiting classes were good. They started to meet some needs, but they didn't really land like an elite class until their third class. The freshman class of 2009 was their first highly ranked class. But what happened was they started filling needs in their first two classes. Their 2007 class, to me, was very similar to what Notre Dame's first free class under Marcus Freeman was, which is to me the 2023 class, or excuse me, their 2007 class was similar to what I view Marcus Freeman's first class. Uh, you look at their 2008 class; it's a really good class. They started adding some big time players. It wasn't quite, sort of that elite, what we come to expect Alabama to be kind of class, but it was still really good. It was a class that added a lot of talent to that football team. And so you look at the top, you look at Julio Jones, they got in that class, Jerome Harris, Mark Barron, Mark Ingram, who was a lower ranked guy. So it was a very good class. And that to me reminds me a lot of what Notre Dame's 2023 class was. And so that began that real juggernaut of recruiting for Notre Dame, for Alabama. And then you look at the 2009 class, it was a highly ranked class. You had Trent Richardson, Dre Kirkpatrick, Nico Johnson, DJ Fluker, AJ McCarron. It was a great class, but it was also a pretty good year nationally. So Notre Dame's in a situation where I don't know that they're capable of landing that kind of class, but it was what Alabama started stacking on top of it after the fact that really led to their surgence, because it wasn't like the classes that won their championships were not teams that were loaded with 4 straight top 5 classes. They had like 1 or 2, and they were all younger guys. Notre Dame is in a similar situation where they've had if they finish the 24 year off the way that I hope that they will, you've got 2 really dynamic back-to-back top 5 classes. Now it's about building. And so this staff has to be able to build on the 25 situation as well. The interesting thing about the 25 classes is there's a unique build there between the players that are local and can you really clean up in Chicago. I've had people say, you should maybe take Marquise Lightfoot to help you with the Chicago next year. No, you don't need to do that. Marquise Lightfoot is not a player that Notre Dame coaching staff believes is as good as the guys that they have in the class already. And I agree with them. So you don't make the push for him. I'm good with that. But you've got to next year with the Christopher Burgesses, the Talon Taylors, the Nathaniel Marshalls, you got to clean up in Chicago. You've got to be able to go down and get some kids in from regions that you're having some success now, continue certain pipelines. So we have seen teams kind of recruit well early and then not build on it. And that's what the 25 class is. And I think the momentum that they get finishing 24 combined with the season they're going to have is going to play a role. But they've got to lay that foundation now. They've got to lay that foundation of the relationships they're building with these kids now. And I think that the fact that their board is so small allows them to kind of spend more time on that. But I think that's where Notre Dame is at. We're going to learn a lot about about Al Washington. We're going to learn a lot about Joe Rudolph. We're going to learn a lot about Chris O'Leary and their ability, and Al Golden and their ability to be, can you be part of a championship program from a recruiting standpoint over this next month to 6 to 8 months, and their ability to not only close in 24, but also put themselves in strong positions in the 2025 class. That's something that Marcus Freeman did as the defensive coordinator and then the head coach. That's something that some of the coaches that have left have done. And so now it's about, can this current group do that? And if they can, then the juggernaut that we think Notre Dame can be we'll see it. If they can't, then Notre Dame is going to be a lot like what they were under Brian Kelly. Pretty good, but not good enough. And that's the crossroads Notre Dame is at from a recruiting standpoint. Going to have some fun with this next topic. I always enjoy kind of Heisman conversations, preseason Heisman conversations, because, it never quite goes how you think it's going to go, or often doesn't quite go how you think it's going to go. Who thought going into last year that Drake May was going to be a guy that in November was someone we considered to be a Heisman Trophy candidate? And it's been a long time since we went into a season thinking Notre Dame had a Heisman Trophy candidate. Now, I know that Josh Adams kind of had a little bit of a breakout in 2017 for a while. He was a guy that you had the 33 trucking thing that they had, the hats and all that other kind of stuff in 2017. And he was getting some a little bit of Heisman love, ended up not being in the top 10 because he faded down the stretch. And so even though he had really good numbers, He kind of faded down the stretch and wasn't really a guy that was in that conversation. But it's been a long time since we've gone into a season thinking the Notre Dame had a guy, Manti, in 2012, finished second in Heisman Trophy voting. But who had Manti Te'o finishing runner up in the Heisman Trophy voting on their bingo card before the season started? I don't think many people did, right? And so to me, when I look at it, um, uh, I'm sorry. Somebody did somebody that are you Sam Anderson? Are you saying that CJ Carr has the lowest floor of anyone in the class? Floor QB and is the lowest floor QB in the class? I, I'm sorry. I'm a little confused by that because that threw me off. You're gonna have to explain that one. Okay, he said highest. Okay, cool. All right, good save, Sam, because I was a little confused by that. Back on track. Sorry, but see, this is why I don't want to do mailbag because I get distracted by things like that. But I saw that and I was like, no, that can't be right. All right, so we're good, Sam. So you get back into these situations where you break down the Heisman Trophy voting, and you're like, yeah, Notre Dame's just not going to be in it. It's not going to be a thing. Well, then you enter the season, you say, Notre Dame could have that guy. And people have asked a lot of questions in the chat about, what would Sam Hartman need to do to be a Heisman Trophy contender? And so it's an interesting conversation. I've seen some things come out where Sam Hartman is getting consistent top 10 looks in Heisman Trophy conversations. There's an article that came out 2 days ago at 247 Sports that had him ninth. I've seen preseason magazines have him even higher than that. So what I wanted to kind of have some fun with today is just to quickly look at, and this is where we're going to wrap up on. We do have a couple super chats that I'll get to at the end, but we're going to wrap up on this topic. And it's basically Sam Hartman and the Heisman. What would Sam Hartman need to do to win a Heisman? What would a Heisman Trophy winning season mean for Notre Dame? And then also kind of who are my top Heisman contenders looking into the 23 season. The 23 season. So that's what we're going to kind of wrap up on today. So number one, what's the first thing Sam Hartman can do to be a Heisman Trophy contender? That's easy. Transfer to Notre Dame. So he did that. He obviously was a kid who's put up monster numbers the last 2 years at Wake Forest. I think only 2 quarterbacks threw for more yards the last 2 years. That was Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. Only 2 quarterbacks passed for more touchdowns than he did the last 2 years. It was the same 2 quarterbacks, the Power 5 level. And no quarterback accounted for more touchdowns than Sam Hartman did the last 2 seasons at Wake Forest. In that, because he had 12 rushing touchdowns, and neither CJ Stroud nor Bryce Young could match that. So you look at him in 2021, for example, Sam threw for over 4,200 yards. He had 39 passing touchdowns, 11 rushing touchdowns. He accounted for over 4,500 yards of total offense. Let me look at his total yards from scrimmage. He had 4,591 total yards last season, or 2021, and he accounted for 50 touchdowns. And he did not finish in the top 10 for Heisman voting. Didn't finish in it. You had, and you look at his numbers. Kenny Pickett that year had very comparable numbers to Sam Hartman. You look at some of the other quarterbacks who are in the conversation. Matt Corral finished in the top 10 in a year where he threw for 3,300 yards and had 20 passing touchdowns, and he had 11 rushing touchdowns. So a guy finishes in the top 10 at Ole Miss who had 31 touchdowns, 8 fewer than what Sam Hartman passed for. Desmond Ridder was in the top 10 that year. He was at number 8. And he had 3,300 passing yards and had 30 touchdowns, and he rushed for 300 yards and had 6 more touchdowns. So again, another guy who didn't even have as many total touchdowns as Sam Hartman passed for in a year where Sam Hartman had 50 touchdowns. Why? Because he was at Wake Forest, and he led his team to 11 wins in an ACC championship game berth, but he not sniffing it. Part of it's the interceptions are higher, which is the nature of the offense he played in. But the other reality of it is was at Wake Forest. And so so when you look at it, to me, and I kind of look at what Sam Hartman can be at Notre Dame. Just being at Notre Dame right alone is going to have him in the conversation. Because as I just said, he threw for 39 touchdowns in 21, had 50 total, 38 last year, 39 total. He had over 4,000 yards. He had 4,500 yards of total offense in 2021. Last year, he played 2 fewer games. Sam actually accounted for more yards. He actually had more passing yards per game last year than he did the year before. And he was only 8 yards off his per game average. So he just missed 2 games. So if the games would have been the amount, he'd had another 4,500 year and well over 40 touchdowns. So he would have had another big year. Ian Book at Notre Dame finished 9th in Heisman voting in a year where he passed for 2,830 yards and had 15 touchdowns passing, and then added 485 yards rushing and 9 touchdowns. So in 12 games, the same amount of games as Sam Hartman threw for this season, Ian Book had let's see what his total offensive numbers were. Let me pull this up here real quick. That site is not showing it. So in 2020, Ian Book goes out and accounts for 3,315 yards and 24 touchdowns. And he finished 9th in the Heisman Trophy voting. Sam Hartman in 2021 accounts for 4,591 yards, over 1,000 higher. Leads his team to 11 wins in 14 games. Actually, let's look at his just numbers this year so we can have the same number of games. So Ian Book in 12 games passed for 2,830 yards, 15 touchdowns, 485 yards rushing, 9 touchdowns, 3,315 total yards of offense, 7.07 yards per play, 24 touchdowns. 9th in Heisman Trophy voting, 12 games. Sam Hartman last year passes for 3,701 yards, has 129 yards rushing, so 3,830 yards of offense. That's over 500 more yards of per game, or total yards than Ian Book. That is 24 plus 9, 43 more yards per game. He had a higher yards per play, 7.23 to Ian Book 7.07, and he accounted for 39 touchdowns and finished in the top 10. So the difference is where are you? And this is what it's always been for 20 years. The Heisman Trophy goes to one of the best offensive quarterback, running back, or wide receiver on one of the best teams in the country. If Ian Book's at Wake Forest, those same exact numbers and that same exact record do not have him 9th in the Heisman voting. So that's the first thing that he did. That's the reality of it. That's the bias part of it. And this is one of those ones where being at Notre Dame could be a bias for him. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, well then what does he need to do to be a legitimate Heisman contender, numbers-wise? He's not going to throw for the kind of yards that past winners have. He's not going to throw for 4,800 yards like Bryce Young did in 2021. He's not going to throw for 4,500 yards like Caleb Williams did this year. So what does he need to do? Well, look what the number 2 Heisman voters this year were. C.J. Stroud this past season in 13 games threw for 3,688 yards and 41 touchdowns, and Max Duggan finished for 3,698 yards. Hendon Hooker finished in the top 5 with 3,100 yards. Bryce Young this year threw for 3,300 yards. So I think for Sam Hartman, if you can get to 3,500 plus yards, that's a number that's going to allow him to be in the conversation. If he can get to 30, I'd say if the closer he gets to over 35 total touchdowns, he'd probably get close to 40 total touchdowns, whether it's 35 passing and 5 rushing, whatever the case may be. I think he's going to need to lower his interception rate a little bit, get it to 10 or lower. To me, I'm good with that, and just be an impactful player. Those are numbers that if he's at Notre Dame, we'll have him in the conversation if there's one different thing that happens, and that is Notre Dame has to be really good. You can't be 9-3. You can't be 9-4. If you put up those numbers on last year's team and the results of the games are the same, you're not a Heisman contender, nor really should you be. The way that the current thing is, it's going to have to be Notre Dame is going to be really good. But the counter to that is, if Sam Hartman puts up those numbers, then Notre Dame is going to be really good. I've asked people this before, and I'll ask all of you. You guys can answer in the chat. If Sam Hartman is Notre Dame's quarterback last year, do they lose to Marshall? I think most of us are going to say no. if Sam Hartman is and I'm saying he's the quarterback and nothing else changes. There's no other differences. Do they beat Marshall? We all agree, yes. Do they beat Stanford? I think we all agree, yes. There's no way they lose to those games. I don't think either one of those teams beat Notre Dame. Then the question is, okay, would they have been able to beat Ohio State and USC? I think at best you go 1-1 in those two games. I think beating Ohio State last year still would have been tough because I don't think actually Tyler Buchner. I thought he played okay that game. The problem they had last year against Ohio State was they couldn't run the football, and they didn't give the quarterback time to throw. I don't know that changes if Sam Hartman's the quarterback. I think that would have been tougher. I think USC they could have beat. And I've said this, guys. USC did not play great against Notre Dame. Caleb Williams played great against Notre Dame. Notre Dame had a bad game plan that allowed USC to run the ball more than they should have. And Caleb Williams was like playing like Superman. I think you look, and I've said this, it's a 17-7 game at halftime. Notre Dame gets the ball. They go right down the field. They're in scoring territory. I think they were already in field goal territory. And Drew Pine drops the ball. USC recovers. They go down and score, and next thing you know, it's 24-7, and it's ball game. Notre Dame kept scoring to make it closer, but they never really challenged USC after that. I've contended that if they score there, it's 17-14, that's a different ball game because now every time they score, you score back. It's a 3-point game. You make one stop, and you've got the lead back. And then you've got another chance. I think it was 31. I'm trying to remember what the score was when he threw the interception. I think it was 31-24. Let me just find this box score real quick because I'm trying to remember what the score was when Drew threw the second had the second turnover in the game when he threw the interception in the second half. So it was 31-21. Notre Dame has the ball. There is 6 minutes to go on the clock when they get the ball. They're driving. They actually, let's see, first down. Yeah, you should get one first down, and you're running they ran a kind of they had a 2-hole throw situation. So USC was running cover 2, and Deion Colsey's open in that 2-hole throw. Then he hits it. It's a big gain. They're out near midfield, and now they're rolling. Instead, he was unwilling to make that throw. He scrambles around, throws the ball down the field, gets picked off. USC gets the ball with less than 5 minutes to go. They go down, put the game away 38-21. Notre Dame goes down the field and scores again, make it 38-27 to make it look closer than it was. But that was your chance. Those were your two chances to really get in that game, and they couldn't get it done. I'm of the belief, with as bad as USC secondary was last year, that with Sam Hartman in that game, it's a different ball game. So I will say they'll at least at split one of those two games. But even if you say they still lose those two games, that's a 10-2 football team. That's a 2-game difference. I think this team has a chance to be a better football team. I think the schedule's tougher, top to bottom. I think the top of the schedule is not going to be quite as tough as last year's. I think USC is going to be very similar. I think Clemson's going to be better. I think Ohio State's going to be not quite as good, but still pretty good. But you get 2 of those 3 games at home. I think the rest of it is some of the other schools. Duke is really good. I think Louisville's going to be pretty solid this year. NC State's a good football team. Pitt's a good football team. I think Stanford will be a little better than they were last year, but still not very good. So I think the schedule will be tough. So it's like minimum 10-2, but if they can somehow go 11-1 and go into November as a playoff team, Sam Hartman's going to have the numbers and the record and the ranking to be in the Heisman Trophy conversation. Then it comes down to the final factor for Sam Hartman is what do you do in the big games? Look, if Sam Hartman goes out there against Louisville, throws a couple picks, Notre Dame still wins the game. It's an ugly win. He doesn't play that great. Yeah, those for 250 yards, those for a couple touchdowns, but he has a couple turnovers. Notre Dame wins like 31-20. It's, 31-24. You get the job done. It's a W. No one's going to care if he plays great against how he did against Louisville or Pitt, if he lights up Ohio State, USC, and Clemson, or at least in 2 of those 3 games lights it up. That's going to be the key. And he's going to have to outplay Caleb Williams. Simple as that. Now, I don't know that Caleb Williams is going to have a shot to repeat, just because I think what's going to happen to Caleb is what happens to a lot of other quarterbacks that have a lot of success or win a Heisman. They're going to pick his game apart. They're just going to find everything to flaw in Caleb Williams so they can have somebody else. That's what I think. And so if there's another quarterback that's put up similar numbers, then you're going to see that guy get the benefit of the doubt. But this is the interesting thing about the Heisman Trophy this year, is there's a lot of quarterbacks that people view as being Heisman contenders that are going to struggle to be in that conversation because of their team. And one of them that I'm looking at is Drake May. I know Drake May gets a lot of talk about being one of those guys, but I don't know if his team is going to be good enough. So then you have to ask yourself, are guys like Jordan Travis, is a guy like Jordan Travis going to be able to put up the numbers needed to be in a conversation with a Caleb Williams for the Heisman Trophy? Michael Penix will put up good enough numbers if he can stay healthy, but will Washington be able to get enough of the focus and have the wins they need to for him to be a legitimate contender? Or will Caleb Williams kind of suck all the oxygen out of the West Coast? Well, I mean, there's a chance that Michael will get his football. He'll get his chance, in my opinion, to go out there and do that. Because when you look at Washington's schedule this year, pull it up here real quick. They have to play USC at USC. So Michael Penix is another guy that'll have a shot, in my opinion, to have some of those spotlight games. And him and Sam Hartman, to me, are the two dark horses for me for two reasons. Number one is they both have a chance to put up really good numbers. Obviously, Michael Penix put up big numbers last year. Didn't get a lot of attention for the Heisman Trophy compared to other quarterbacks. He finished 8th last year, but at least he got some. But he threw for 4,600 yards. They went 11-2. But the problem is, I don't know that they had any wins last year that you could look at and say, boy, that was a nationwide program-defining win. They beat Stanford. They beat Oregon State, Oregon, Texas in a bowl game that nobody really paid attention to. But he didn't get a chance to play USC. Well, this year, now Bo Nix is going to be a Heisman Trophy contender, according to a lot of people. You get a chance to play him again. Can you beat him at home this year? But then a month later, a little less than a month later, November 4th, the same weekend that Notre Dame plays Clemson. So Sam Hartman is going to be going on the road to play Clemson, and then Michael Penix is going on the road to play USC and Caleb Williams. So those are two guys that will get head-to-heads with the reigning Heisman Trophy champ winner and a team that many people expect to be a top 10 playoff caliber team, and they'll both get a chance to shine. So those are the things that Sam Hartman's going to have to do, that Michael Penix is going to have to do. I actually have Michael Penix, like I said, and Sam Hartman as dark horse contenders this year because I think their teams are going to be really good. I think Drake May is going to have a tough time being a Heisman Trophy contender this year, like winner. Like he'll be in it because he'll most likely put up good numbers, although I'm curious what their offense is going to look like with the new coordinator. Jordan Travis is a guy that I don't know if he's going to put up the numbers that you need to be a Heisman Trophy contender. I really don't. We'll have to see kind of how that plays out because he's gonna be fun to watch. He's gonna be entertaining. I think Florida State's got a shot to be a really good team. They've got to win the ACC, right? They've got to beat sort of their, slay their dragon, which is Clemson, if he's going to have a shot for that. But he's going to put up numbers. But he's a kid that threw for 3,200 yards last year, rushed for 400, so 3,600 yards, 31 touchdowns. I don't know if those are Heisman Trophy numbers for someone who's not already like a big spotlight guy in college football. And I don't know that Jordan Travis is that guy. So I mean, because like when I talk about Drake May, Drake finished with 4,300 yards passing last year, 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Also ran for his rushing numbers, 698 yards and 7 touchdowns. So that kid had 45 touchdowns and had about 5,000 yards of offense, and he finished 10th in Heisman Trophy voting last year because his team wasn't very good. Even though I thought, and they faded late. So even though I thought he was pretty darn good, he finished 10th. He finished behind Bijan Robinson and Michael Penix, Blake Corum, Bryce Young, and Hendon Hooker. So that's going to be a guy that is going to have a tough time. Jordan Travis might have a tough time with the numbers. We'll see if Bo Nix can repeat what he did. Blake Corum's a guy that a lot of people have in the conversation. My only question with Blake Corum is two questions. Is number one, will he be healthy enough to repeat what he did last year? And number two, is he going to get as many touches as he did last year? If Michigan is smart, to me, they won't use him as much as they did last year and keep him fresh for November. I think that's going to be a big key for Blake Corum is in Michigan is like, do you throw more this year with JJ McCarthy being a second year starter? Do you give more touches to Donovan Edwards to maybe balance things out, which would then make it hard for Blake Corum to really put up the numbers to be in that conversation? I don't see Jaden Daniels as being that kind of guy. I think Marvin Harrison could be in the conversation if he can put up monster numbers, because you won't necessarily have a quarterback that's going to get there. I think Marvin Harrison could have a Devontae Smith type of season. There's no doubt about it, where he could go out and be a Heisman Trophy contender. I mean, his numbers last year were pretty good. I mean, let's be honest about that. There wasn't a lack of production last year. He had 77 catches, 1,263 yards, 14 touchdowns. But when you look at what Devontae did the year he won the Heisman Trophy, he had 117 catches for 1,800 yards and 23 touchdowns. I just don't know if Marvin can put up the kind of numbers that he would need to just out-duel some of the quarterbacks that are going to be part of the Heisman Trophy voting for that season. And the other thing for 2020, none of the only other people that put up like the numbers he put up at quarterback were Trevor Lawrence did not put up monster numbers that year. He finished second. He didn't put up great numbers that year. Missed games. Mac Jones put up big numbers, but I think a lot of that credit was given to Devontae Smith, and then Kyle Trask put up big numbers, but he wasn't the name brand, and the team wasn't very good. So I don't know if Marvin Harrison's going to be able to have the production that he needs to have. Quinn Ewers maybe could be a guy that jumps into that conversation. He's a bit of a dark horse for me, but I really think when I look at potential Heisman Trophy voting, I think number one, Sean brought this up last week, somebody that we're not talking about right now is going to jump up and have a monster year. Is it Nicholas Singleton from Penn State? Is it someone like him? Is it a KJ Jefferson at Arkansas? Is it Cade Klubnik at Clemson? Is it somebody like that? Is it Quinn Ewers? But I look at the season and I say, if I'm a Heisman voter and I'm thinking, who are the guys that I'm focusing on right now? It's Caleb Williams, it's Drake May, it's Michael Penix, it's Blake Corum, it's Jordan Travis, it's Sam Hartman, it's Bo Nix, and it's Marvin Harrison Jr. Those are the guys that are on my radar right now as my top Heisman candidates. And I think Sam Hartman, if he can lead his team to some big wins, could be one of those guys. Now, what would that mean for Notre Dame if something like that happened? Because I don't want to talk about the Heisman stuff during the season. It's fun to talk about in the offseason, but it's not something that we'll talk about during the season. But what would it mean? I think something like that would be huge for Notre Dame. Absolutely huge for Notre Dame. Number one, it opens up the portal to Notre Dame. Like, hey, you can go to Notre Dame, have great success in the transfer portal, number one. Number two, I think what it would mean to have a Heisman Trophy winner from a branding and all the obvious stuff. But the final piece is, guys, if Sam Hartman's winning the Heisman Trophy or even a runner-up the Heisman Trophy, it means Notre Dame's really good, and they won a lot of big games, and they put up big numbers. And when you think about, we talked about recruiting earlier, if you look at what Notre Dame's doing on offensive recruiting right now, where I would argue this class is, if they can get Gilby Lambert, this is a top 3 to 4 offensive class at worst. If they can get Gilby Lambert and Carter Nelson, it's a top 1 to 2 offensive class in college football. And they're doing that off of it, not much to show offensively. If they go out this year and have a lot of success, which means playoff contender, which is what's required of Sam Hartman of a Notre Dame quarterback to be in the Heisman conversation, because I don't think he's going to have the 4,500 passing yards, the 45 touchdowns, the crazy numbers that Lincoln Riley's quarterbacks put up. He's not going to have that. But if they can be really, really good and throw for 35 to 3,800 yards, 30-plus touchdowns, run for a few touchdowns, and Notre Dame puts up numbers this year, that's a borderline 40-point offense with those numbers. It is. What does that do for Notre Dame's recruiting and the perception of Notre Dame with recruits in the 25 and 26 classes? If something like that happens, it would be huge, absolutely huge. And it would make quarterback recruiting a whole lot easier as well, what some people in the chat have just mentioned. It completely changes things because now you start a pipeline of that, like, hey, he did that. Look what I can do in that offense. And I think that would be the biggest impact for Notre Dame. It'd be a lot of fun to watch. It'd be a lot of fun to follow. I don't know if Notre Dame fans have really paid much attention to the Heisman Trophy in the last 10 years. It'd be fun to be able to kind of pay attention to that, even though I think the award has lost some of its luster. I think they should change the criteria for it and just say, hey, look, this is what we're doing. It's not the best player in football. It's not the most outstanding player in college football. It's the best quarterback, receiver, or running back on one of the best teams. That's kind of what it is, as opposed to the other. They almost won't need to call it an MVP as opposed to a most outstanding because of the way that it's handed out. But it'd be a lot of fun to watch, and I would certainly enjoy being able to do that. Before we get out of here, I do have two super chats I want to get to real quick. We have one from Fighting Mike 87. Thank you for the super chat, Fighting Mike. He says, "What would you need to see to keep fighting to give a now or never guy a chance in camp, even when your eyes or the tape doesn't make you confident?" Boy, that's a good question, Mike. And this goes back to the earlier conversation. To me, all of those guys that we've seen in the now or never conversation, with the exception of maybe Maris Luafau, are guys that are have done enough to stay in the battle in fall camp and if not be starters in fall camp. I think like Jordan Patel doesn't have to have a light the world on fire to keep a starting job. It's just about, okay, are you going to get 70% of the snaps or 50% of the snaps? Same with Riley Mills. Are you going to be the dominant force here, or are you just going to be part of a rotation? Deion Colsey's going to play next year. Chris Tyree's going to play next year. There's no doubt. But are they focal points of the offense or just rotation players? So I think that in that regard, that's the minimum of what we're going to see from all those guys. The question now, as far as, okay, do I keep him there? Like none of them are getting a chance in camp. It's okay. Here's where you are, and are you going to push your way forward or not? And so, what do I need to see? Depends on the guy. For Deion Colsey, it's just consistency. For Chris Tyree, can he be a more precise route runner? Can he catch the ball consistently? Is he comfortable with the offense? Just, hey, I'm snapping routes off. I know what I'm doing. Hey, we're getting the call. We're in the tempo period. Like those are things for me with Chris Tyree that will be big for me as a coach. If I was on Notre Dame staff, is okay when we have these scripted plays in camp and all that, he knows what he's doing, but how does he handle when we go tempo, when we have our 2-minute period? Does he line up, know where to line up? Does he know how to get the call? Does he run the right route? Does he run it to the right depth when things are going fast and everything is sped up and he can't, think about, okay, look to the sideline. Okay, got the call. Okay, I'm supposed to line up 6 yards outside the tackle. All right, cool. I'm here. All right, I've got to do this. I've got this route. All right, now let's go. Or it's like, okay, get the call, bam, and you just got to know, I got to be where I'm at. I got to see it, and I just got to react to it. And so if a guy's not as confident in his responsibilities in those up-tempo pressure periods, you're going to see more mistakes. And that's kind of where the answer that Chris Tyree has to have is the confidence in the system, the confidence as a route, not confidence, the precision as a route runner, and the ability to catch the ball down the field. If he does that, he's going to be a focal point. With Deion Colsey, it's just I need to see him being consistently in his top range. No player is elite every day or close to it. It's more about I need to see that he's locked in every day. I need to see that the effort is there every day. And I need to see more practices where he's that dude than practices where he's just not there. And that's going to be the key for him. With Andrew Kristofic, it's going to be simple. Is he just who he's been? And really for Andrew Kristofic, it's not even just about him. If he's just the guy that he's been the last 2 years and nobody else steps up, he's the starter. He's a solid player. But if other guys are stepping up and he's just who he's been, that's where he could kind of get in trouble. So does he take his game to another level? With Maris Luafau, is he making plays and is he consistently doing his job? And can he get off blocks? Those are going to be the keys. And you start to see those in practice. And so I think those are going to be the things for me. With like Cam Hart, Ramon Henderson, it has nothing to do with camp. Not a darn thing to do with camp. With Riley Mills, I don't really care what he does in camp. Honestly, if I'm being honest with you, it's what does he do when the lights are on? And that's going to be really a key for all of them. But some of these guys got to show me something in practice. The guys I just talked about, I don't care what Cam Hart does in practice. Honestly, I don't even care if he even practices for half fall camp. Just get him ready the last 3 weeks, bring him along slowly early in fall camp. Just get him ramped up the last 3 weeks before the season, and he should be good to go. I don't care what he does in practice. I don't care what Ramon Henderson does in practice. I don't care what Riley Mills does in practice. I need to see those guys step up and be that guy in games. That's going to be the key for me. So very good question. Very good question, Fighting Mike 87. And then Tyrell Wilson, thank you for the super chat, Tyrell. Appreciate that. What's punt returns look like this season? I have to go back to Tommy Zibikowski as our last great punt returner, maybe TJ Jones. Who's next? That's a good question. Honestly, obviously going to see Matt Salerno in the conversation. A guy that I talked about this pre-spring, and I won't be shocked at all if the punt return this year is Jaden Greathouse. I won't. He was a really good punt returner last year in high school. Had 4 returns for touchdowns. He's strong, so here's a couple of keys for a punt. Obviously there's the simple. You got to be able to catch the ball, track the ball, and catch it clean, all that, right? But once the ball is caught, there's 2 keys for a really dynamic punt returner for me. The number one is you've got to be strong enough to make guys miss right away and break some tackles, but then you also have to be elusive enough to make people miss in space. That's going to be the key. And I think Jaden has that. He's a guy that I have my eye on. Jeremiah Love is a guy that I have my eye on. Micah Bell is a guy that I'd have my eye on as potential punt returners of the freshman class. I just don't know if there's anybody on the current roster that I would look at and say that's a punt returner. I mean, none of your returning receivers are outside of Salerno. I wouldn't have Chris Tyree working on that. He's my kick returner, and I want him working on receiver. Jadarian Price, I think, could be an impact kick returner. So could Bell, so could Love, but I don't know that he's a punt returner, especially the Achilles injury. I don't know that any of my defensive backs would be that. Maybe Xavier Watts could be a punt returner. He was a really good punt returner in high school. Maybe him. He's someone I might give a look to. Those are some of the guys, but I just have a feeling, Tyrell, that Jaden Greathouse is gonna eventually be that guy that takes that job over. I do. We'll see if he's able to get it done, but he's got a lot of tools that I look for, including great hands. And honestly, in today's era, we all want to have punt returns. My whole thing is if I have a guy that never lets the ball hit the ground and averages 6 yards of return, I'm fine with that. I really am. It's not ideal. I don't love it. I would be a team that really pushes for a lot of blocks. But the way the game is now with the rugby kicks and different rules and things like that, it's a little harder to get a punt return off than it was. And special teams coaches have gotten smarter. It used to be like when I was a freshman in college, I was on the kick off, kick return, I was on the kick return, and I was on the punt cover teams as a freshman receiver. And so I was on the second team in punt return. And our job was we would give, because it was more of that kind of that shield, right? We would give. You had the personal protector, and then you had to make sure your block was secured. Then you go, and that's when you could get like wall returns. Everybody played high school football that's over the age of 35 knows what a wall return is. You can't do a wall return now because guys are just getting down there too quick, and so. Because now it's like you've got the 3 big guys in the back. There's guys, they'll just let them go. It wasn't the only 2 guys that you just let go back when I was doing it was this long snapper and the 2 gunners. That was it. The 2 outside guys. That was it. Now it's like a lot of those guys go and teams keep their big guys. Now, if more people can be like Brian, good Lord. Like the special teams coach last year, Brian Mason, and start finding more holes in that method and start blocking more kicks, then we might see it cycle back and then return game becomes more important. But to me, you've got to be able to kick it to catch it. That's the most important thing. However, if I have a guy that I know can catch it every time, not let it hit the ground, not let it roll, maximize field position, but then is also capable of making plays, then he's going to be my punt returner over the guy that might even be a little bit more steady catching it, but isn't going to make plays. So that's why I think for me, I would want Jaden Greathouse to maybe be someone considered for that guy. And I mentioned others. I mentioned Michael Bell. I mentioned Xavier Watts. I mentioned Jeremiah Love, guys like that. Jabron Payne would be one that I'd consider. But those are guys that I would look at as potential contenders. Now, as far as the Tyrell's comment about Tommy Zibikowski being the last great punt returner, I'm glad that John A1 was able to address that before I did. But I think CJ Sanders is a very underrated player for Notre Dame in history because I don't think he's ever kind of gotten the appreciation that he deserves as a punt returner. I thought he's a pretty darn good punt returner. He had a touchdown in 2015. He averaged 12.5 yards per punt return in 2016 before he got hurt. I don't know if I'd call him great, but I thought he was pretty good. I thought he's a pretty good punt returner. And then also Golden Tate in his 2019 or 2009 was a pretty good punt returner as well. He only had 12 returns, but he averaged 14.3 per return. And if you remember, he had that kick return against Pitt. But obviously, Zbikowski was the most entertaining. That's absolutely certain, and was a very dynamic punt returner. All right, that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. I want to thank you all for being with me today. It was a lot longer show than I thought. So hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back tonight, or IB Nation Sports Talk tonight, 6 o'clock. They'll be there for I think we'll have a mailbag. So Sean and the guys will be there for IB Nation Sports Talk mailbag tonight. I'll be back tomorrow. Make sure obviously I say hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell. All that's important. But also definitely make sure tomorrow, because I may have to change up the time. There is a camp at Notre Dame tomorrow that we're allowed to go to. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to go or not, but it's around 2:30 to 4. So if I decide to go, then I'm going to have to move. I'll either have to cancel the show or move it up earlier. If I decide not to go to it, I got to look at the list of the guys and just kind of get the idea of the format. If I decide not to go for it, then we'll be in a normal 1 o'clock time. But that's why you need to hit the notification bell to make sure that you know when we go, because we may move it up a little bit tomorrow, may cancel it, or may just be on time. I'm just not quite sure yet. So that's why you really need to have that notification bell hit. Also, we've had a ton of signups for the message board. I'm really wanting to get a lot more. There's a couple standards we're trying to get to before football season starts. If you haven't done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Monthly membership and annual membership. People that have said, hey, I really want to support the show beyond just the normal membership, you can sign up for the Booster Club. Check all that out and find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So thanks for being with me, everybody, today. I very much enjoyed it. We'll be back tomorrow at some point in time. Have the IB Nation Sports Talk tonight. And, of course, Friday, Ryan and I will be back together for Irish Breakdown mailbag. So that's going to be a Friday free-for-all mailbag. So you want to join us then as well. Have a great rest of your day. Talk to you again soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.